Hey, everybody, it's your host, Hampton Dortch, and I am honored to welcome my guest today, Dan Lathrop. Dan, I'm giving him the title Best Mustache on LinkedIn. And if you're watching this or you see a clip from this, you will witness and agree with that today. So I'm excited to have him. Dan, welcome to the show, man.
Awesome, Hampton. Thanks so much for inviting me. Great opportunity. And thanks for complimenting my mustache.
Of course. Man, you've got like the little like twirl at the end of it. That's just impressive. I feel like you've had to really probably go through some early awkward stages. But now look at where you are. We can almost make an analogy about this. People probably
Oh, yeah.
talk about, the overnight success of someone, and you're like, oh no, I bet you've gone through some challenging times growing that thing, huh?
Oh, totally. It's super awkward at first because everyone's like, what's that on your upper lip? And then as it starts to like curl out, like you have one side that's more dominant. And even now there's a process, right? Like I'm unveiling, I'm being vulnerable. I have to use a blow dryer. I have product for it. My wife will joke and friends of ours will joke that I take longer to get ready than she does. And that may or may not be true. I won't confirm or deny it, but it's definitely a reality. It's not easy to walk around with something like this.
Oh man, that's awesome. I love the vulnerability. We're starting off strong.
Come on.
And speaking of that, I want to jump into your story and just ask you about something that I've seen you post about. We've talked about before, and one of my things that I really like about Dan is I feel like he's just really open with the world. A lot of times, social media, in this case, LinkedIn, where I spend a lot of time, and so does Dan. It's easy to feel the temptation to make it a highlight reel, but if you act like a real person, it resonates with people more. And I feel like you do that really well. So we can jump in wherever you want with your story. One of the key things I remember is you talking about being in a ministry capacity, maybe you wanted to be a pastor. And can you tell us a bit about that story?
Yeah, for sure. So we served at a church in Massachusetts when we lived there at the time. And we were in multiple capacities. My wife had served in a different role at some point in time, non-paid. It was, on a volunteer basis. And so we also did youth ministry together. And I think we had one child at the time. So this is going back a decade, essentially. And we had a friend of ours, well, he became a friend, was a consultant of the church, came to help just align us and get clarity on team development, where the church is going. And he was my direct oversight, my mentor. And one of the things that he was doing is giving people DISC assessments to understand their behaviors. That was collectively going to help our overall team so that we could be a strong, cohesive unit. We could move in sync. I often think of like the military example. You watch military movies, they're communicating, they're covering each other, that type of thing. So you want to see that in a team dynamic, in my opinion, as well. And so I took the DISC assessment. We were going to have a debrief, and he knew, my eyes were set on, I think I want to be pastor. I think I want to lead a church. And I got my results, and we debriefed on him. We talked about him, and he was the kindest man because he was honest. And he said, "Hey, Dan, with, your results and the way that you behave and the way that you act, you don't have the makeup of what a traditional pastor within, these churches would be." And it was gut wrenching, right? You have your eyes set on this. And again, I was young, naive, all the things. And so it was hard. I probably cried at some point in time, after that, alone in my room or talking to my wife about it. But as I look back, I was so thankful for that, right? Because he was, there's an old song. I don't know who it is, but the lyric is, clear, I think, clear to be kind in the right measure, cruel to be kind in the right measure. Cruel to be kind is a very good sign. Don't know who sings it, but essentially you need to be able to be kind when you're giving hard news. And so he kind of was, but it didn't faze him because he knew he was doing me the honor of doing that. He'd be doing me a disservice by lying to me. So that was part of that journey. And it took some time for me to process through, but that really was a pivotal moment for me to go, who am I? I need to become more self-aware. And that's really what that relationship with that guy, he was a mentor of mine for years. He actually he lives here in Texas in the town that we do. He is the reason that I wanted to become a coach, and the reason that I got involved with DISC assessments and helping people with self-awareness. So everything, kind of leads back to him investing in my life and me wanting to replicate that and even take it further.
That's huge. Well, I appreciate you sharing that, especially because a lot of the people listening are probably around the age that you were when you got that feedback. And so, what kind of encouragement do you have to the young professional with the big hairy goals that may need to take an assessment, to seek wiser counsel, to humble themselves and listen to maybe advice that they're getting, or seek it out to make sure that the direction they're heading is one that seems wise?
Yeah, I'd say if you get discouraged, that's okay. Like, don't try and run and avoid discouragement, because it's good to have big dreams and it's good to think you might want to do something, but also know that life has seasons. In that particular season, it felt as though that was the direction that we were supposed to go. But we had, a correction in the middle of that, right? So I think of like air traffic controllers. There's a storm coming, you need to get up to higher altitude, you call to them, that, they help kind of give you that guidance in that direction. And I actually see that mentor in my life. He's done that many times. And so, not allowing the discouragement to take over, but seeking out relationships with people who are, maybe a couple seasons ahead of you, and getting some peer feedback. I think those two things are vital, because one, someone who's a couple seasons ahead of you, they can, speak some truth into you. Peers also can give their perspective. But being able to get into relationships where, iron sharpens iron. You're around people who aren't going to be an echo chamber. They're not just going to tell you yes. They're going to be real and authentic with you. It's not always easy. It's not always fun. Like, relationships, I don't think are always meant to be like easy breezy. Like, there's a reality that life is difficult. There's hard conversations that need to happen. And I've even heard someone talk about how, you complain about your life, but I'm messing up the quote. You complain about your life the way that it is, but the change is right behind the hard conversations you're not having. And so I think that there's a reality to that. And as soon as you can have that hard conversation, immediately the next hard conversation that day doesn't seem that hard, because you've just got over that hurdle.
Yeah, man, that's good. So when you got this feedback, this hard news, when the mentor that you sought out gave you the news that you weren't looking for, did you immediately accept that, or did pride bubble up a little bit and you're like, no, like this is my calling, this is what I'm supposed to do? Did you push back a little bit, or did you immediately have the humility to like listen and understand?
I think I probably tried to hide my emotions, so I definitely didn't push back. I definitely listened to try and understand what he was communicating to me. And initially, at that time, my results on the DISC, again, I can talk a little bit more, a higher overview at a different moment, but I got an S, which is steadfast, steadiness. Think of like they're loyal, a golden retriever. If in an animal world, that's how I would refer to it. And so that isn't the ideal for someone who's going to be a pioneering leader, someone who's going to be a visionary. And so I think part of who I was at that time is I was trying to figure out who I was. And so I was probably rather timid then, not so much now. And so I definitely listened to what he had to say, got to process through that. But there was a pastor within the movement that we were part of at that time who was a similar style as me. And so he said, hey, reach out to this individual, talk to them and see what they do. So then I had a few email exchanges with this particular individual. So it was encouraging to me to at least know, hey, there was one person who, might have had certain giftings, but behaved similar to me, to at least get their feedback and hear what they had to say. But it was definitely a journey. It wasn't like, hey, you're done doing any sort of ministry because this isn't for you. That was just, this is what's going on. And then within the next year and a half, we had our second kid, and, our direct oversight and our lead pastor, they said, hey, listen, the demands at home are going to be greater. You've been doing this on a volunteer basis. It makes it makes the most sense to try and figure out a transition. And we were like, hey, that's great. We'll begin to pray about it. And yeah, we prayed about it, and we felt like God said, hey, it's time for you to step away from doing youth ministry. So within about a year and a half's time, we were stepping out of that ministry role. So it wasn't an immediate thing. Getting that response from that assessment wasn't the end all be all and boom, you're cut off, you're done. No, we were still in that capacity and served. But God was doing other things, I think, behind the scenes that then led to say, okay, yep, my capacity is going to change. I'm still working a full-time job while doing youth ministry. Something's got to give. And so it made the most sense. And the transition was so honoring. It was so honoring of them to approach us and to say, hey, we think that this season is going to be a difficult one. So it may be best for you to get some more family time.
Yeah. Wow. That is really great of them. I love this quote. One of my pastors says it a lot, but he says, God gives us enough clarity to take the next step, but not too much to eliminate the need for faith. And I can imagine you in that time period, young and ambitious, like I try to be, and like I know a lot of the listeners do. You want to know, okay, well, if I'm not going to be a lead pastor, what am I going to be? What is my calling? What is my purpose? And like you want to know right then. And it sounds like you had a year and a half of learning and processing until you kind of began on your next journey. And so I know that was around 10 or so years ago, and I still see you talk about the DISC assessment quite a lot. Now, was that something that for the last 10 years you've just really learned, or did you kind of forget about it for a while and pick it back up when you started coaching? Keep going with the story. I want to hear what happened.
Yeah. So, when I took that DISC, that was the first DISC assessment I've ever taken. I think heard about it at a financial institution that I worked at some point in time. I was always interested in assessments and self-awareness and trying to understand each other, Myers-Briggs. So that was another assessment that I was familiar with at the time. But I didn't go and get certified right away. It was, again, something that I utilized. So I talked the talk with language. So we would have friends come over, and I joke with my wife, they probably hated coming to our apartment because it would always end up in a DISC conversation. And it wasn't like I was trying to back people into a corner. It was just the way that the conversation would go and with the questions I was asking. I think as someone who has a coaching gifting, if you want to call it that, or a coaching mindset, I just was always so interested in trying to understand people and what made them tick, and why didn't you like that? And so it just always ended up in those DISC conversations, and I feel bad, and I apologize to all the friends that didn't want to be in those conversations. But it wasn't until I think 2017 when I officially went and got my certification with DISC. So there was, a handful of years where I talked about it. I wasn't actually giving anyone the assessment, but I was explaining it a lot of the time. I was, finding free resources online to provide to friends or coworkers. Ironically enough, I did at one of the financial institutions I worked at. I was so over the top about assessments, and I think 16personalities.com was one that I had found and really liked. And I got to do a 16 personalities like debrief with our branches. There was only 2 branches. And so we had a staff meeting one time after work. And so everyone took it. And then I gave a little presentation about it. And it was one of those moments where I felt so out of place, but I was also like in the heart of what I should be doing, if that makes sense. I don't know if you've ever had that feeling like you're doing what you feel like you're supposed to do, but you still feel so out of place. So that was a very interesting experience for me. And I think that also led eventually into me getting DISC. So the story was a little bit out of order. But I got certified 2017 and have been using it ever since.
Okay, man. I love that. So when you got certified in 2017, did you become a coach around then, or did it take a little bit longer?
Yeah, I'd say I haven't. The official time that I would have said that I was a coach probably was like a year and a half, 2 years ago. I would have said, I think I'm going to try and do this like life coaching thing. But when we were doing ministry, I was coaching team members or coaching other staff members or friends. Again, people were just showing up that's just, we were living life together. That was community. And so that's what we did. So it was all happening organically without that title. Even me getting coached by my mentor, he never said, I am coaching you, and this is what, like, that never happened. It just happened organically. And then I had a recollection of, oh, this was coaching. And so because it impacted my life so deeply in a positive way, I then was like, I just want to make sure I can do this for other people. So I never labeled it. But within the past couple of years, it's a goal of mine to eventually be able to do it full time. I would love to be able to be a coach full time to help people, achieve their goals and to believe in themselves more, because that's one of the things that I've found in talking with people the past couple of years is we're our biggest obstacle. We're in our own way for no good reason. We build those barriers and those walls to keep ourselves confined because we believe the lies that our mind will tell us.
Mm. I think some of the best business owners, entrepreneurs, solopreneurs that I've seen are the ones that do the thing for free. They don't even know that they're doing it for a while. It's just part of who they are and the way that God made them. And then all of a sudden it's like, oh, how can I transition into spending 40 plus hours a week doing this? Because I feel like this is how I serve people best. And I feel like I'm watching that happen with you, which I think is really cool. So you said in your conversations, you're finding that a lot of people are just in their own way. Tell me more about that.
Yeah. It's whether it's, trying to create habits, I'm trying to create a morning routine, or I'm trying to get this, or, I really want to make sure I get to the gym, but I don't know how to do that. So oftentimes it's just self-inflicted. It's the intentionality, and, they're kind of getting their own way, like the busyness, quote unquote, because I believe that busyness is a choice. And it's definitely not something to boast about, in my opinion. Sorry for people who disagree. But that's one of the biggest barriers, right? Is being able to just push that mindset that's restricting you out of the way. I haven't read Atomic Habits, but I've watched a lot of interviews and listened to James Clear, and I love his newsletter. But I feel like it's a lot of those principles, right? Like, you want to go to the gym in the morning? Make sure you go to bed at a reasonable time and lay out all your gym clothes the night before. Like, again, I don't go and tell them you need to do this, but I'll ask questions to help them realize what could they do that's going to set them up for success, right? Because a successful morning routine starts the night before. So my encouragement oftentimes when people are trying to accomplish goals, whatever it would be, I always tell them, start with the end in mind, right? It's like using a GPS. You put in your final destination and it tells you the best route. The same thing would go for a goal. You're trying to accomplish X, Y, or Z. In your mind's eye, this is what it looks like. Okay, we know the destination. Well, now through that coaching relationship, those coaching conversations, we then as the coach, I kind of like the GPS. I ask questions to help them figure out which street that they need to turn on so that they can get to that final destination.
Yeah, I love the question asking there. From what I understand, a big part of coaching is not necessarily telling what that's more consulting, right? Coaching, you're just asking people questions and helping them understand and figure out that they probably are in their own way. Like, one of the things you said is that busyness is a choice. And maybe that does ruffle somebody's feathers, but really, I agree with you. I mean, it sounds like something that I could tell when you said that. That's something you're pretty adamant about. Talk to me about that.
Yeah, part of it goes back to Britt and I got married young, and we had kids young, and we were in community and life with people who were single and who were our age, maybe a little bit older. I'm not trying to sound judgy, but when I would hear people in our community who were single talk about being busy, it really grinded my gears, because it was self-inflicted. They were saying yes to too many things, potentially. Again, I don't know everyone's circumstances. And I remember having exciting conversations with some of these individuals about it, because they would push back when I might ask a question about something. And so that's something that's stuck in my head, is we have the choice to choose what we work on that day, whether single, married, whatever it would be. we can fill our calendar to make it look like we're doing something, or to make ourselves feel like we're doing something. But at the end of the day, what impact did you have? What did you actually accomplish? Because you can have, little reminders on your calendar. You can have tasks that you check off, but what's the big picture for the day? The night before, when you were prepping for the morning, you knew what you had to accomplish. You wake up and you do 13 other things. You didn't work on the 2 things that you said you were going to do. Did you really accomplish what you had to? Now, some days fires happen. I get it. You have to put fires out. But the busyness, I believe, is something that our culture almost, we're just bombarded, right? Whether it's social media, all these ads, all these things, let's consume all these movies, all these things on the streaming devices. We're just susceptible to the distractions. And so distractions are now being labeled as busy.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of people, including myself at times, it's easy to fall asleep at the wheel of your own life. You're just kind of living and doing and checking off tasks without saying, what did I really accomplish? And at the end of the day, what is my goal? Like, what am I trying to do? Now, for you, I just from knowing you and seeing some of the things you post about, I believe that you coaching and helping people, that's just got to be a gift and something that like God gave you, like this desire to help people. But I also probably recognize a lot of coaches that I know have had like an old them before maybe they had coaching, or they learned some of the principles about coaching, and then have seen the fruit of the new them on the back end of having a coach or some form of accountability or something. Has that been an experience for you?
Oh man, absolutely. And old Dan still makes his way into new Dan's life sometimes. Yeah. Old Dan was not self-aware. Old Dan was very timid, very shy. I mean, I'm a raging extrovert, which is funny. Some people are like, oh, okay. But if you had known me in high school, you'd have been like, no way. I walked into class, I sat down, I listened to the teacher, I didn't talk to people. I was just in my own world, and I think part of it is like, I've always wanted to respect authority in that way. And I've always thought like, oh, I'm respecting authority by being attentive, by paying attention. So that was, something that was going on, being very quiet, didn't stand up for myself, didn't speak up for myself, would just take whatever was thrown at me. Definitely not a disciplined person. And I'm still working on discipline. I don't think you'll ever perfect that. And so those are definitely some of the characteristics I think about when I think about old Dan. And old Dan new Dan has transformed through coaching, has learned how he can be disciplined, and has learned tools in which, to be aware of, am I wasting my time, or where am I spending my time? And God gave me a wonderful wife to poke and prod me when I am going astray, or when I am not focusing where I need to be focusing. So she gets really most of the credit, because now she's the one who's having to air traffic control me when I'm going off the rails. But it's a real thing, seeing a transformation from how you were before, even self-awareness, like understanding who I am and how I communicate and what's the best way to communicate with me. And then as soon as you begin to understand those things, you're like, oh, that makes sense. Well, now when you're communicating with a coworker, it's like, oh, I've noticed that they're actually different than me. Like, I don't really like the details, but when I start to tell them about a work project, they're asking me about all these details. It seems like they like details. Maybe I should ask them, hey, do you prefer if I come to you with like this long set of details and tasks? And they're like, yes, please. And it's, epiphany moment, because we're not all the same. One thing that aggravated me at one of the financial institutions I worked at was we had a manager who tried to manage everyone the same. And it would make me so mad, because I was not the same as this person. But you can't, we're not cookie cutter. Everyone has different strengths, weaknesses, gifts, abilities. And so you need to manage to that. And it's work as a leader, right? It's work to have that Rolodex in your mind and remember, this is so-and-so, that, they prefer this. So it takes time. And if you don't have a common language around that, if you don't have that commonality, you're not going to get anywhere.
Yeah. I love that you're talking about self-awareness. I know you're a Working Genius fan. I'm a Big Dis fan. I will say I'm a Working Genius junkie. And I've been learning a lot about that recently. And they always say that the best leaders are self-aware leaders. So regardless of what
Yep.
your results are on any assessment that you take, the best
Mm-hmm.
thing you can do to be a great leader is just to understand how you are wired, and then you can figure out how to fill in the gaps. And like with the Working Genius specifically, it's less about, and I know you know this, but for the listener, it's less about strengths and weaknesses and more about what brings you energy in life and then what drains you. And so
Mm-hmm.
for me, it's like I know my sweet spots where I could just go for 48 hours with no sleep, and then I know the things that are going to drain me, and so I can plan my day, try to plan some of my conversations, and just again be aware that like my bend is not going to be towards enablement, which is one of the factors in the Working Genius. And so it doesn't
Mm-hmm.
mean I'm bad at it, but like learning to learning to do that. And then another thing that you said, um, this is kind of a little pithy saying that I've been loving recently. You know, the golden rule is treat everybody the way that you want to be treated. Well, I think the golden rule gets it wrong. You spoke to that. It's treat everybody the way that they want to be treated, because we're all wired differently and you
Yep.
don't want to lead everybody the same. So I love the call to create some form of a common language and understand the way that other people want to be treated, because it's likely not the same the way that you want to be.
Totally. Yeah, I love the Working Genius. I'm so glad you brought that up. Yeah, love that assessment. Love the book, the podcast. So like, if anyone's listening, definitely check out those resources, because I'll get off my soapbox in a second. But Working Genius, in tandem with other assessments is great, because I like to look at the productivity aspect, like what types of work bring someone joy and what types of work really destroy them, because that will really tell you a lot about what you're doing on the day-to-day basis. I'm coaching an old roommate of my wife's back in Massachusetts, and I had her take the Working Genius. I had her, she's taken the disc before, so I looked at both of those things, and we've started talking about, hey, what types of work actually are you doing? And so the frustrations, it makes sense. We've talked about the reason why, there are certain things that certain types of meetings may not be as fun for this individual. Also, the things that bring her joy. Oh, yeah, I do love this. I do love that. It's all starting to make sense. And I just got a voice memo from her the other night and was like, hey, we were debriefing on this thing, and I had self-awareness in this area, and I got to do this, and I got to say this. And I was blown away, because as a coach, my hope is that my clients that I'm working with, that they're going to do the work, because I'm not the one doing the work. I'm asking questions. I'm helping them navigate and figure out which way they need to go. But they need to have the onus to own it. And they need to be the ones who actually take action and make it happen. And so getting that, that nighttime text message was the best, because it shows me that she cares and she's taking action and making it happen. So that was super encouraging.
Man, I love to hear that. And I like what you said. Nobody's going to do the work for you. It's good, and in most cases necessary for us to have accountability in our lives, which I know that you are doing a good job of like providing for others. But at the end of the day, we've got to take ownership of our own lives and do the work. So I'm definitely happy to hear that. But as we're wrapping up here, you mentioned that you got married young, and I know a lot of my listeners are young professionals, and you go through middle school, high school, college. People are doing similar activities or similar ages, and then it's like, and obviously you don't have to go to college. Think 18 to 22 years old. In that time frame, people either go live in their parents' basement or start a business and start making millions of dollars. People are either single for 10 years or they get married. They either never have kids or they have 5 kids before they're 35. Like, I feel like that's when like everything just gets crazy. Like, and then there's the rat race and comparison and all that. But just curious, I'd love to learn about your experience getting married young, maybe some of the hard things that you learned, some of the benefits, maybe encouragement you have to people that are married young. Would love to just hear a little bit about that.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, getting married is awesome. And it's also one of the most difficult things you'll do, because you realize how selfish you are. And then you have kids like you and your wife just did. And then you realize how still how you're so selfish, right? It's like as soon as you bring another life into this world, it goes to another level. But I joke. So, and my wife and I, we dated for a short time, we're engaged for a short time, and we're married. So it's like from official dating to marriage was like 7 months. So it was a quick process. There's a story there for another time. But I joke because when we were looking at apartments for before we, were getting married, we got into one of our first fights actually with how the blinds are turned. Like, do the blinds go up or do the blinds go down? And so I joke to say, like, all of the nuances, all of the things that you do that are normal to you are not normal to someone else, especially when you're thinking about moving in together once you're married. And so that was a learning experience to figure out, like, why do you? So there's a lot of learning that I'm still doing, but I definitely.
Mm. Yep. Yeah. Hey, by the way, this is not recording. I don't know if you got did you get that notification that said your storage is full? Okay, it's totally fine. I think that's happened like once before. I don't really know what that means, but it said it stopped recording like right after you started talking about um having kids. But what I'll probably do is I feel like we were close to the end anyways. You're literally killing it. So I'll probably just like add a little something in and say, "Hey, we ran out of storage, but part 2 is going to be Dan talking about getting married young and everything." But I'll just add something in right there. But dude, that was great. Yeah. I mean, I love just learning from you and asking you questions, and I'm excited for people to hear from you. That was awesome. Hey, I think you did a really good job, and for what it's worth, I always wanted to be on a podcast and nobody asked me, so I started one. So it's not like I people are like, dude, you have a podcast. I'm like, dude, anyone can start one and post stuff for free. You could fart in the microphone if you wanted to. Like you can, so no, but it's cool because I've been a guest on like a few, and the ones that I have, it makes you realize, so like, what am I saying? Like, am I, and I'm not saying that like from you, everything you said was great, but it really makes you think about, what do I care about? How do I make this, how do I share this in a way that's interesting to people, and I don't nerd out too long on this subject or whatever. And it's fun. It's good to practice some of that stuff. But I thought you did awesome. Sweet, for sure. And I know we haven't like technically done a like a coaching session, but I don't know if this would be like lying or something, but I know, I feel like I know you and your character and the way that you would coach people enough to even be able to, if it would be helpful, or if you wanted, I can say some good words about you if you ever want to like put something on your website. So just let me know. Okay, sounds good, man. I will. I appreciate you. I'll let you know when this is coming out. Yeah.